tempo, porque eu acho que todo mundo quer ouvir a Jéssica. Eu sou a Alana Riso, da Abraji. Estou super feliz de estar mediando, né, de estar moderando essa super session. O Blendle, ou iTunes, ou Spotify. Eu sempre tive muito interesse, das notícias, eu sempre tive muito interesse em conhecer. All set? Sempre tive muito interesse em conhecer um pouco mais. Já usei em algum momento a plataforma para testar, para ver como é que é. É uma grande oportunidade que a gente está tendo de estar aqui com a Jéssica. A Jéssica é head de conteúdos editoriais. Ela tem um background em imprensa escrita. Então, como a maioria de nós aqui veio de jornal, trabalhava em jornais na Inglaterra e foi migrando para o digital. Eu vou abrir o palco para ela começar a falar, porque eu acho que o que a gente está mais interessada é em ouvi-la. O que eu queria pedir é, quem puder já ir anotando as perguntas, já vai me mandando, que aí, logo depois da apresentação dela, a gente já tem as perguntas para a gente... Eu vou reduzir as minhas perguntas e estou aberta às perguntas de vocês. Então, eu já vou fazendo as perguntas que vocês vão me mandando, tá bom? Jéssica, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's really lovely to be here, and thank you so much to Abraji for inviting me over from Amsterdam to come and talk to you today. As you've heard, I'm Jessica. I'm head of editorial at Blendle, and if you don't know what we do or who we are, don't worry, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and then I'd like to hear from you guys. I'd like to spend most of this session answering any questions that you have. So here goes. Blendle started with 3 things. 2 of those things you will probably never have heard of, and 1 of those things you will have heard of. So the first 2 were these 2 guys on the screen here. On your left is a guy called Martin Blankenstein, and on your right is a man called Alexander Klopping. And these 2 journalists were both working in their native Netherlands around 4 years ago. Alexander was a tech journalist, and Martin was covering a whole range of international and domestic news stories. And in the Netherlands at that time, like most of the rest of the world, advertising revenue was falling through the floor, and a whole plethora of free content on the internet was making quality journalism very difficult to do, which is a situation I'm sure all of you will recognize in this room. But at the same time, something was also happening in the music industry, which again you'll all know about. Decline in album sales, the free streaming was meaning that it was also very hard to support music. But what the music industry had managed to do, which is the third part of this story for how Blendle came to be, was that they had come up with something that looked like a possible solution. And that was Spotify, a service you'll all know and I'm sure a lot of you use. And Alexander and Martin were not the first journalists to say, well, can't we do this for news? Why couldn't we find a service like this for news? But what they probably were the first people to do was start knocking on the doors of Dutch publishers and asking the question, can we do this? And the Dutch publishers said no. They said you'll never find enough people, let alone enough young people, to pay for this service, and none of the other publishers will ever come on board. So Alexander and Martin went away, and they built a prototype. And they went back with what they thought was a kind of Spotify or iTunes service for news, and they said again to the Dutch publishers, can we do this? And they said, no, you'll never find enough young people to pay for this, and you'll never convince any of the other publishers to come on board. But over the course of the next year, these 2 guys worked really, really hard. They listened to the feedback from the publishers and from test users, and they worked their way up from middle managers to the top brass, and they started to convince people that they could have something here. And there was 1 or 2 sort of slightly unusual elements in the Dutch media market that perhaps made this more likely in the Netherlands than anywhere else, which was that the Dutch media market subscriptions have always counted for around 80% of revenue in the Dutch market. So they weren't quite as badly affected by the dropout in advertising as everywhere else. But at the same time, they were affected by the amount of free content coming online, and they didn't even have the dwindling advertising revenues to fall back on. So they were really looking for a new type of subscription model to fill that gap. And so after that year of going back again and again and again, Alexander and Martin finally got the answers that they were looking for. And in 2014, Blendle was launched for the first time with every single major Dutch publisher on board, all those guys that said no. And we launched with this mission, which was to help our users discover and support quality journalism. What Alexander fondly describes as the oh shit moment came slightly later that year, which was when the New York Times and German publishing house Axel Springer invested $3.8 million in the company, and we realized that this was really going somewhere. I think perhaps what they found was that what they'd managed to do was become a research and development lab for journalism, and that's why people were taking notice. So this is how Blendle looks today. We've got 1 million users, or more than 1 million users. We passed that milestone in August of last year, and 1 in 5 of those are paying. We have platforms in 3 countries, our home market, the Netherlands, Germany, and we're in a closed beta in the United States. We work with more than 150 publications across 7 countries. We have 80 employees, including 50 developers and 20 journalists. And we have more than 4 million stories in our archives at the moment, with thousands more arriving every single day. And currently, we offer 2 payment methods to support journalism, which is micropayments, which I'm sure is the one that perhaps those of you who already know about Blendle have heard about. And we also offer a subscription model, which is quite new, and which I'll tell you a little bit more about. So that's how we were founded, and that's how we've grown. But what does Blendle actually do? So how does it work? And I'll start with perhaps the second part of that mission statement to talk about that, which is how we allow people to support the best quality journalism. And we started out with micropayments, as I mentioned. So that's where users pay small amounts for every story they read. In the US, the amount varies from 9 cents up to $1.15. And in Europe, that can be as little as 1 cent up to around €1.99. In order for people to do this, what they do is they log in to or sign up to Blendle, and they can top up their digital wallet with $10 or $20 at a time. They can then go to our digital kiosk and they can scroll through the publications we have available, or they can find stories via our email newsletters or timeline feature. Find a story they like, they click on it, it opens, and the cost of that story is automatically deducted from their wallet. We also have, if they don't like the story, we have a refund feature, which hopefully I'm going to show you now. So you can see here, you got to the end of a story, you didn't like it, the quality wasn't good enough, you were disappointed with what you found. You can click on this button here, you get a little screen that says, why do you want to refund your money? The options are things like the quality was poor, the price point was too high, or something very honest, like I just copy and pasted this into a Word document and I've read it there instead. You tell us why you're doing it, and the amount gets put back into your wallet. The revenue split with publishers in this format is 70% of the cost goes to the publisher and 30% of the cost goes to Blendle. And with this particular model, we've given millions of euros to publishers across Europe up until now. Some fun facts about micropayments is that you might be interested in. Around 60% of our users are reading on mobile. 33 cents is the average cost of a story bought via micropayments. And 5 minutes is the average length of a story that's bought on Blendle. So that's the micropayments model. But we also, when we were developing this, one of the things we got consistently from our users was a request for a subscription or a flat rate, something more akin to Spotify than to iTunes. And that's something that we, just this year, in January, we've launched something called Blendle Premium in the Netherlands. At the moment, this is in the Netherlands only. We're testing it in our home market to begin with. But this costs €9.99 per month for a personalized selection of 20 stories every day. The revenue split here, and 30% goes to Blendle. So it's a pretty good deal for the publishers. Well, we think so anyway. So that's how we help users support quality journalism. But the second part of our mission, as I mentioned earlier, was also to help users discover journalism. When Alexander and Martin started doing this was very much about access. How do we help people get behind paywalls without having to sign up to multiple different ones? How do we make access super easy and beautiful in the way that Spotify has done? Of social media, and we wanted to help them really only get the best and only pay for the best. And this is where our editorial and personalization operations come in. So we have 20, I think currently, 20 journalists working across 3 editorial teams. So one for the Netherlands, one for Germany, and one for the United States. And every morning they wake up at the crack of dawn and they read every single publication that we have on offer, front to back, and they find the best stories and they select them for our users. So it's not a lot of fun getting up at 4 or 5 a.m. every morning, but they do it for a good cause. They focus on quality and originality. They're looking for not stories that are more agency copy, not stories that are press releases rewritten. They're looking for real depth, real quality. But again, we go further than just picking great stories. We also create something for our users, which is a personalized selection of stories. So not only do we pick great stories, but we make sure that the stories that are delivered to you via our timeline or email newsletters are stories that are tailored for you. I'm going to talk a little bit about data science and machine learning for about 5 minutes, but don't be scared because it is interesting. And if I can understand it, then I think everyone else can too. As I mentioned before, we get thousands of stories, new stories into Blendle every single day. And this what's called a head-tail curve, shows kind of what happens with those stories. So on this side of the head-tail curve, we have lots of stories that nobody wants to read. This is the really boring crap. So the example we give here is actually just an editor's letter. But on this end of the curve, we have a handful of stories that absolutely everybody wants to read, really popular among a high number of our users. So the example here is about a fertility doctor who it turned out had fathered a whole load of kids, unbeknownst to the women he was treating. And in the middle, we have things that are perhaps interesting to quite a lot of people, but we get a lot of duplicates, a lot of the same sorts of stories. And further down, we have stories that are very interesting to a very small number of people. So the example here is about the mating patterns of electric eels. So with this, how do we know who to send which stories? How do we help people discover great journalism within this massive amount of new things coming out every day? And the answer, most of the time, is that we need to know a lot about the stories that are coming into Blendle, and we need to know a lot about our users as well. And then we apply a filter bubble. And for the purpose of this session, a filter bubble is going to be a really positive word, and I'll explain why that is. And we personalize. So this is how we do it. As mentioned, we start off with our editors. I'm going to stand up for this so I can see what I'm talking about. As I mentioned, we start off with our editors. So they've picked a selection of stories on a particular day, and it might look like this. So these are the stories that our editors have picked on a particular morning. And for every single story, there are around 40 signals attached to that story that our data team works to make sure that all those stories have these signals attached. So that's things like author, subject, story length, complexity. And what our machine does is it takes those into account. So if we start with author, of the stories that have been selected by our editors, we have a look and we see which, let's go back a little bit there. We have a look and we see of the authors you've read in the past, looking at your user behavior from previous days, which of these authors are you likely to want to read about again? And the red line here represents those authors that we know that you like. We also look at things like subject. So again, the subject here, we look at what sort of stories you've read before, and the red line represents how likely we think you are to be interested in the stories that have been picked today. we do the same for complexity, length, sentiment, feel, lots and lots of different signals. But what we don't take into account when we're doing this process is popularity. We're not interested in what the most popular story is. We're interested in what you would want to read. So then what we do, it's getting a little bit complicated here, is that we weight the different signals. So we try and ask ourselves, how important is author going to be to this particular user? Or how important is the subject going to be to this particular user? And that changes which stories you might get sent on any given day. So if we give the author lots of weight, then your story selection might look like this. And if we gave the subject a lot of weight, then the story selection might look like this. But the question for us then becomes, how do we know what to give the most weight? How do we know which users will prefer a selection based on author or a selection based on a subject? And that's where we use an algorithm. So we start off randomly. So this is a random day, and we have a selection of stories, and we weight author and subject equally. And what we then do is we make, for every single user we have, we make a series of guesses. So each of these darts represents a guess that we've made about whether a user will weight one of these signals more strongly than the other. We then send that selection of stories out to the users, and we watch what they do. We see when they read more. Do they read more stories when the author is given the most weight or when the subject is given the most weight? And bigger darts equals more reading. So we observe what they do, and when we see the patterns, we adjust accordingly. And we keep doing this process again and again and again until we reach what we call the optimum, and we know exactly how to weight those different signals. I'm nearly done on the machine learning, I promise. So what happens then is we take author and subject and all those signals, we add them together with the right weight, and what we end up with is relevance, the most relevant stories for every single user. But what happens then is that people sometimes say to us, well, aren't you just like everyone else then? You've created a filter bubble like Facebook does, like Twitter does, and you're just giving people the stories that we know they want to read, and they'll never read anything that challenges their viewpoint or their opinion on the world. And that would be the case, except that what we do here is we diversify. So we look at your most relevant story, so the one furthest on your left here, and we ask ourselves, of all the other stories we might send to you, how similar are those stories to the most relevant story? So the green line here represents how similar those stories are to your most relevant one. And if it's too relevant, we bump it. And then we do the same for the second story, and the third story, and the fourth, until you get a selection that is both personalized to you and it's diverse. And the final cherry on the cake is we then add in what we call must-reads. So every user gets sent every day 3 stories that are selected by our editorial teams that are exactly the same for everyone. These are stories we consider to be so important, the analysis is so crucial, it will challenge the way people think, that it doesn't matter what author you like or what subject you like, we will send them to everyone to try and break that filter bubble a little bit. So why have I told you all that in such excruciating detail? Well, as I said earlier, we started off Blendle being about access, and then we realized that that wasn't enough, and we wanted to be about curating quality journalism to help people find the best stuff. And then we realized that that wasn't enough either. We wanted to kind of adapt our mission so that it ends up here. That we help our users support and discover relevant and diverse journalism. So that's where we've ended up. 3 years on from the journey we started when we started knocking on Dutch publishers' doors. You just get caught up in my notes. Okay, so that's where we are now. But what have we learned in the last 3 years? The first thing we've learned is that our users prefer the why, not the what, in the journalism world. The what happened is available in so many places for free, whether that's news wires, Twitter, cable news. Everybody gets the what, and people really aren't willing to pay for that, as much as they are willing to pay for in-depth analysis and context that helps them really understand the news. So what we've found is that analyses, well-informed opinion, investigation, reportage, all of these things are the subjects that do really well on Blendle. And to give you an example of that, these are the 3 stories that the most popular stories on Blendle in the first 6 months of this year. So to begin with, we had this story. This was a Wall Street Journal story from April this year, and this is about Ayaan Hirsi Ali, the Somalian thinker on Islam and religion. This was the weekend interview with her called Islam's Most Eloquent Apostate. So given all the different things that have happened in the world in the first 6 months of this year, terror attacks, Trump's changing stance towards Syria, it's really interesting to us that the most popular story is not telling us what happened in those areas, but it's someone actually talking about the link between Islam and political ideology. And this was by far and away the most popular story of the first 6 months. The second most popular story was this story called The Repairman. From Inc. magazine. 9 cents for a 15-minute story. It feels like a pretty good deal. This is a story about iFixit, which is a company that teaches people how to fix all sorts of technology, but most notably Apple products, and Apple hate them for that because people don't go to their stores anymore. We've noticed that anything we put out there on Apple, people love. Stories that look behind the scenes at Apple, anything that kind of looks at the worship of Steve Jobs, anything that tells you about the direction the company's going in, people are fascinated by it. And people getting one over on them is even better. So this was, again, super popular for us back in April. And the third most popular story was this one from the New York Times. This is a 4-minute read, really short, came out in January, so lots of people thinking about the new year and how they're going to change all of their habits. This was called The Year of Conquering Negativity. And this was a story all about how to change your thought patterns, how to reframe negative thinking. And this is another thing we've noticed, certainly in the States, but also in all 3 countries. What would perhaps derisively be called life hacks on the internet still do really well for us, but it has to be quality. So it can't just be, 10 ways to improve your love life. It has to be something really well researched. So something like, improving the longevity of your marriage that includes interviews from cognitive, like behavioral psychologists, that kind of includes professors and real professionals in the field. That does really well. But if we put out something that's just poorly researched, regurgitated PR, we get very high refund rates on that. So it was no surprise to us that this kind of story, which again included psychologists, behavioral therapists, advice on how to retrain your brain, was really popular for us in the first half of this year. Another lesson we've learned, people don't abuse the refund feature. Everyone always says to us, doesn't everyone just refund everything? Don't they just read it, click on it, get their money back? Humans are terrible people, of course they do. But they don't. Our global refund rate currently stands at around 7%. And what we find is actually we get really useful information from refunds. Because people tell us the reasons, we can do a lot with that. So the number one reason we get for refunds is this story the quality wasn't high enough. So we learn a lot for our curation about the level people are looking for. But the second reason that closely follows that is that the price was too high. Now, the prices on micropayments are set by the publishers, so that's really valuable information we can give back to the publishers and say, we're getting loads of refunds here because your price point is too high. So that's something we've definitely learned. And this is perhaps the third point. I mentioned about the subscription model, which we've launched in the Netherlands. And it was really early days there. We've only been going a few months, and we're very much treating this as a test in our home market. But the first few months of that have shown at the moment that people read more with a subscription model, 2 to 3 times more than they do with micropayments. And that's a really interesting finding for us and for the publishers in terms of what kind of model we might offer going forward. There's still lots of work to do there. This is very early days. We want to see if this continues as a trend, but it helps us to think about how we might expand into our other markets as well. And lastly, what challenges do we face still? Lots of them, but these are the main ones. The first one is getting younger people to pay for news. That was always part of the reason that we started this mission, but it's still a huge challenge for us. Research out in the States recently said that just under 40% of 18 to 34-year-olds pay for news in some sort of form. So that might be with a traditional subscription model like the New York Times. It might be paying for a news app, or it might be giving donations to public service media. But that's still a lot lower than a lot of other age groups. When it comes to Blendle, the majority of our users are under 35, and that's something we're really proud of. But if you go to the younger end of that age bracket, it's still really difficult to get people to pay. And we know that we face a real challenge there. I was interested reading the other week a big report from the American Press Institute, which was all about, for those young people that do pay, why do they pay? And I think there are some really interesting lessons there that perhaps we can take away, but also publishers as well. So your young people who pay for news are more motivated than other age groups by a desire to support the news organisation's mission. And I think you can see some of the major publishers building on this at the moment. So the Washington Post's new Democracy Dies in Darkness campaign, for example, and the New York Times, the truth is more important now than ever. They're really getting powerful, short messages out to young people, and their subscriptions are really climbing as a result. For Blendle, I think we need to communicate that we have these very mission-driven publications in our kiosk. That's the first thing. But I think we also need to find a way to communicate our mission really clearly, how important it is to support quality journalism in an era of fake news and at a time when there's so much partisan media. We need to find a way to communicate that really clearly to this group of people who are clearly mission-driven. This one will come as no surprise to anyone, but it's true of people who pay for news, of young people who pay for news as well, that discovering a news source through social media is a key factor in deciding to pay for it. This is something where we really, really need to work hard. I think we struggle a little bit in that we are kind of at this strange gap between publisher and platform. And that's quite hard to get across your mission on social media, because we can share the stories that we have access to, but people always want to share the original version from the Washington Post website than they will do for a Blendle version. So we need to work hard about and think about how we can reach young people through social, perhaps tied into the first point with a really strong mission statement. The third thing is that younger subscribers for news are more interested than older payers in news about science, technology, hobbies, and schools. We just need to make sure we're catering really well to those niches. Do we have the right publications in our kiosks that are going to appeal to those areas? Are we curating in a way that allows people to really delve into young people to delve into those interest areas? And last of all, news as social flow is a more important element for younger adults. So what this means is that younger adults who are paying for news are doing so because they want to appear knowledgeable amongst their friends and their elders. They want to be able to show that they understand the world and what's going on. And I think what we can do with this is really develop editorial products that play into this. So we already do something called a deep dive, which is an exploration, newsletter, email newsletter exploration of a single issue that really helps give context, similar to what the Skim is doing for millennial women in America as well. So really to understand why people are paying and what their motivations are. Couple of challenges, convincing publishers that we're friends, not a foe. We often get asked when we speak to publishers for the first time, well, won't you just cannibalize my subscriptions? Aren't you just going to take away people who would ordinarily take up a full subscription? But our research and our experience hasn't borne this out at all. What we've found is that people who come to Blendle, we're reaching a very different group of people, often younger, but also they're not people who would consider a single subscription. So you're bringing your brand to a new audience is always what we say to publishers there. And actually, we can also operate as a funnel. So if you have a user and then he or she is reading half a dozen economist stories every week, they might realize that actually it is worth their while to take an economist subscription after all. And we actually upsell to individual subscriptions for individual publications within the app. So you can do the whole process with Blendle. Catering for more dynamic content is a real challenge for us. Up until now, we've been really focused on the written word and text, and that is not how the internet works in 2017, and we're very aware of that. We've also been very focused on the print products, so our kiosk is very much made up of the PDFs of magazines and newspapers with a few web feeds, the exception. And we need to think about flipping that on its head, because that's not the way that the media landscape looks anymore. We also have some work with video in its infancy. This picture you see here is a cool project we did in the Netherlands with Vice, where we did some exclusive video content, a partnership for our premium users. And we do support video for some publishers, but that really is very early stage, and we need to think more about that. The same goes for displaying great photojournalism, great data journalism in a way that looks as good as the text that we currently use. And lastly, entering the US market. This is one of our biggest challenges for the rest of this year. As I mentioned, we've been in closed beta in the States since last year. We let a few thousand new users in every week, and I think we've built to just under 70,000 beta users at the moment. They're a very engaged community. They tell us what they think of the product, and we're refining that all the time and working towards a full US launch later this year. And we have some amazing American publishing partners, the New York Times, the Post, the Journal, Condé Nast, Time Inc., Bloomberg, I could go on, which is fantastic. But we also know that this is the most competitive media market in the world, and the English language market is also probably the one that has the most free content available. So we don't underestimate the scale of that challenge there. But we're excited for it, and we're excited for the rest of this year to move that forward. And we really hope that we're contributing to finding a solution for journalism the way that Spotify has at least found a partial solution for music. So that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening to me talk. I hope it was interesting, and I'd love to answer your questions.
Jéssica, já tenho algumas boas perguntas aqui, continuem mandando. Eu vou começar, na verdade, com uma pergunta que eu queria um pouco do histórico. Como é que vocês conseguiram convencer os grandes veículos, né? Como você acabou de listar alguns dos grandes veículos de comunicação e mídia tradicional, como é que vocês conseguiram convencê-lo a entrar no projeto?
I think I think it was partly in the initial phases. It was very much to do with what was those market forces in the Dutch journalism market. So they didn't have advertising to fall back on. They could see that free content was really destroying their subscription revenues. They needed another model. They needed another way. And I think they really felt that actually by doing this together, we could probably make more progress than doing it apart. As I spoke to a little bit there, it's also about reaching a new audience. So there are a whole generation of young people who are growing up thinking that not paying for news is completely normal. But it costs money to make, it costs money to do, and it's really important for our democracy. And with slightly less lofty goals, you know, the music industry has managed to convince younger people that this takes money to make, it takes money to do, and if you want to enjoy that process, then you're going to have to pay. So we take that to publishers and say, look, we can really be involved in a culture shift here, and you know, you can get this as a way, an extra revenue stream for you. I think interestingly, we don't present ourselves as a silver bullet. We're not the answer, but we are going to be part of a broad coalition of things that might help sustain this industry long term.
Tem algumas perguntas sobre a precificação das matérias. Quem dá o preço, quem não dá, e também um pouco como é que qual a influência que os publishers têm dentro da plataforma, em quais matérias serão selecionadas, como é que funciona essa relação?
Okay, with pricing on micropayments, that is set by the publishers themselves. For every publisher, they choose the minimum and maximum level of pricing. So a lot of them have tiers of pricing depending on the word length of a story. And as I say, we get feedback on where we think is too high, and we give that feedback to the publishers. But ultimately, you know, if The Economist wants to charge 99 cents for a story and Inc. wants to charge 9 cents, that is up to them, and we very much leave that in their hands. With the premium product, the €9.99 price point, that's something that we've discussed with publishers as we were building that product, and now that we're in this kind of testing phase in the Netherlands, we'll obviously look at how our consumers feel about that price point, and go back to the publishers and work with them on that. In terms of how stories are selected, we very much, so we don't have a political agenda. That's one of our kind of the things we say up front on our FAQs. We're not here to promote one particular party or one particular viewpoint. In fact, if anything, we want to give as diverse a representation as possible. And when we're thinking about publications to add to the platform, we often think, what do we not represent here? Who are we not representing? And so in terms of sort of curation guidelines, we're really looking for original research. Is it an exclusive story? You know, how much time has been put into this? Is it hours and hours of research? Is it pages and pages of documents? We never like to give the kind of reported version of a story, so we would never curate something that was one publication reporting on what another publication has reported on. So those are things we're looking for. But we try to have light and shade within that, so it's not all huge investigative reports into political machinations. We also try to have some light, interesting stuff as well. A piece we had last week was all about why mountain lions don't like the voices of political pundits. Like, we try and keep it interesting for people as well. So, but it's very much based on original quality journalism.
Continuando ainda nessa relação com os publishers, que tipo de informação o Blendle repassa para os publishers? Que tipo de dados pessoais? Quais as regras?
So from the very beginning, we were very clear that we would not be about giving email addresses over to the publishers. That's something that Alexander and Martin felt very strongly about. We're not selling personal information onto third parties as part of what we do. What we do give them access to is data on who's buying what from their publication. So you know, they can see the refund rates for their stories. They can see how many stories have been bought. They have access to an online data portal which looks at that. But this is anonymized data. This is not data about our individual users. So, for example, the personalization examples I just showed, that sort of thing about what you like to read would not be given out to be used by them.
Vocês repassam o feedback do Refound Button, por exemplo, para os publishers? Então, eu coloquei ali que a matéria eu não gostei por isso. Vocês dão um feedback para o publisher?
Yes, we do. I mean, they can see that themselves on the portal. They can access, but yeah, especially on price point for micropayments, I think that was something that was really useful for us from the word go, because if we can see that, you know, people would pay for this, they just don't want to pay quite that much, then that's really important for them to know, and it's important for their subscription strategy, for their own website as well. This isn't just information that's useful for them for their interaction with Blendle. This is useful for them for their own individual subscription plans, because I mean I think that's perhaps a good point to make. All of the publications we work with, or almost all, have their own version of a subscription plan. So Blendle is another weapon in their arsenal, but it's not the only weapon they're using by any means to grow revenue.
Vocês pensam em acrescentar blogueiros e meios independentes na plataforma do Blendle? É tecnologicamente viável incluir blogueiros também?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We have thought about it. One thing that we do at the moment is in the Netherlands, well, in Europe, we have something called the Blendle button, which is a WordPress plugin that bloggers or independent sites can add to their blogs to basically act like a paywall that we essentially we moderate, we run technically. So it kind of locks the content, you click on the button, you pay via your Blendle wallet, and it opens it up. So that is a tool that is available to bloggers. In terms of getting bloggers onto the site, I don't see it as something that we necessarily will do in the very near future, purely because I suppose what we focused on is the big marquee titles that are producing really award-winning journalism. But that's quite an old school way of thinking. There are lots of bloggers producing really great journalism, and I think eventually, you look at a platform like Medium, that's perhaps a really interesting way of thinking about getting original content onto the site as well. So as I say, I don't think it's sort of a short-term goal for us, but it is something that we're aware of, and we don't undervalue the fact that there could be a lot of great journalism that we're missing out on there.
Tem duas perguntas aqui, vou juntar, que é sobre novos mercados. Qual o desafio de abrir novos mercados? Então, por exemplo, falando um pouco do mercado como o Brasil, como é que o Blendle chega em países em desenvolvimento como o Brasil? Faz parte dos planos de vocês?
Well, speaking specifically to Brazil, at the moment we don't have plans to enter here, but that's not to say that we won't. Eventually, we'd love to see Blendle in every country. But in terms of the challenges in new markets, perhaps one of the most interesting is what kind of message you go in there with. So in Europe, a lot of sites are paywalled, so people are reasonably used to paying for content, or being blocked from content. So going in there with a message about access seems like a good idea. But then when we went to Germany, Germany is a really interesting example, because Germany does have a lot of paywall content, but people also pay a tax for public service journalism, so everyone pays that as part of their taxes. So they already feel like they pay for journalism. So to ask them to pay again is actually, even though there's a lot of paywall content, is actually a really hard message to get across in a market like Germany. So then we think about, well, we go with the discovery message, that actually what you're paying for isn't just the access, it's the curation, it's the discovery. So we have to look at each individual market we enter and ask ourselves, what problem are we solving for that market? And for a market like Brazil, I guess you'd have to ask questions around, how much stuff is paywalled, and what is it that we're really doing for people? What are we offering? What are we providing? And that's the question that we ask. Interestingly, Japan is the market with where the most people in the world pay for news. And I think to do a Japanese expansion would be extremely difficult, but I think that that sort of market where everybody's used to paying for news offers opportunities as well. So every single one is different, and we have to think about what do people really want from us.
Você falou que os usuários do Blendle hoje têm uma faixa de idade inferior a 35 anos. Como conquistar as gerações mais jovens, ainda mais jovens?
Yeah, it's really tough. I think one of the biggest things in terms of the younger market is that we're ad-free. So ad blockers are so prevalent amongst younger audiences in news. They absolutely hate ads, and until news organizations and websites at large start designing properly thought out, beautiful online advertising, that's not going to change. Some people are starting to do that. The Outline is a really good example, but for so many people, just it's a horrible experience going on a news website with pop-ups, with ads that aren't relevant to you. It's just a pain in the ass. So that's one of our big points for appealing to a younger audience, that we are ad-free. I think those points I mentioned in the presentation, thinking about what they're really interested in. Again, I turn to the American market for an example, but there's so much journalism around at the moment about politics, which is really important, and we need to curate the best of that. But we know that young people who pay for news are actually most interested in how tech is affecting their lives, how it's changing society, and so we need to make sure that the publications that we have reflect their interests. And it's also about it's a cultural education. It's learning that these things cost money to do. These things are really valuable, and also what the impact is. The journalism that's being done on the Russia probe in America at the moment is changing what's happening in politics, and we need to make that connection really clear and make it really make them understand why that has to be paid for.
Você poderia compartilhar com a gente alguns dados sobre a quantidade, quanto se gasta em média por mês, quantos artigos as pessoas leem por mês?
Yeah, we don't give that information out publicly. As I say, for subscriptions, what we do know is that they'll read 2 to 3 times more under a subscription model than they will under micropayments. In terms of what people will pay, as I mentioned, the average price for a story is around 33 cents. And given that we do have stories that go much lower than that price point, which is kind of 9 cents, 1 cent, people aren't scrimping here. They're not cheap on that front. So it's not that people are trying to get away with paying as little as possible at all. What I will say is the higher price points have a higher refund rate. If you're going to charge, I think some of the German magazines charge up to €1.99 for a cover story. That's a lot for one story. If people are paying that, you want to be damn sure that is a really good story. So we do see higher rates there, and again, that's something we communicate to the publishers.
Tem 2 perguntas sobre os jornalistas. Jornalistas recebem alguma coisa? Não, só as empresas de mídia. Freelancers, tem algum tipo de pagamento para eles? E uma outra pergunta o Blendle tem algum plano de ter jornalistas que produzem conteúdo próprio?
Yeah, it's the publishers that get paid. So the 70-30 revenue split, the 70% gets paid to the publishers. In terms of freelance, the Blendle button that I mentioned is something that freelancers use, but we work with an organisation called Reporters Online in the Netherlands, which is they represent lots of freelance journalists and publish their work, but again, the money goes to the publishers and then or to the organisation, and then that is shared out. In terms of original journalism on the platform, we don't at the moment. Number one, we're a startup, and we're definitely focused on investing to get into these emerging markets that we have, and making sure that the platform works beautifully and the platform works correctly for the publishers that we have. But also, we're not the ones doing the quality. We're a means to an end here. So we're a means to getting to that quality journalism. We aren't the ones that are capable at the moment of doing that amazing work. We're very much happy to leave that to the experts right now. Again, looking into the future, if we became a platform where, so we do things like, we start again. As an example of perhaps the sort of project that might bring original journalism onto the platform that is nowhere else. We have run a series of Blendle originals, something that we call them, in the Netherlands, which is where we work with publishers to get content onto Blendle, which is only on Blendle. So when the Dutch elections happened earlier this year, some of the Dutch publishers produced analysis and opinion that didn't appear anywhere else. It was only for us. So those exclusive partnerships are perhaps one way we get unique, exclusive, original content, but it's not produced by the editors and the journalists that work for us directly.
Tem uma pergunta pouco mais pessoal, né, pela sua experiência tanto em veículos tradicionais quanto agora com a sua experiência digital. Qual o caminho que você vê para o jornalismo investigativo?
Yeah, so it's a really tough question. I left traditional media because I didn't feel like I was doing something good anymore. I felt like I'd become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And when I found Blendle, it was a real kind of aha moment. Again, not to say that we're going to be the silver bullet there, but that people were doing something that actually put money into publishers' pockets, into journalists' pockets. As far as investigative journalism goes, I suppose the very positive thing to take from Blendle is that is what people will pay for. They really will. Our users want investigation. They want reportage from around the world. So you still do have a valuable product there. I think the questions that have been raised today about direct pay to journalists is one that needs to be worked out, and also kind of getting original content to as many people as possible. Can Blendle work as a platform that does that? I feel positive about it, and as I say, in seeing that people will pay for it. But I don't think we found the answer yet to sustaining the level that we have now. I feel as though jobs are being cut all the time, bureaus are disappearing, and we're still bleeding out a little bit before we're going to manage to stem that and turn it around. But having seen that people will pay for it, I do feel positive that there's a way to do that.
Os dados que você apresentou mostram que as pessoas, o conteúdo que elas procuram é um conteúdo de qualidade, né? Tem alguma coisa que foge da curva e não, né, a gente tem como jornalista a gente sempre acha, não, todo mundo quer ler sobre assuntos que não seriam tão pesados como política ou economia, e você mostrou os dados que vão no sentido contrário. Qual que é a sua avaliação? Ainda tem essa demanda por assuntos que seriam matérias que seriam fúteis?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a huge demand. I think people are pretty angry about what they're being fed now. I think for a while at the moment, the thing that they often flag as the thing they really, really hate is the same story being covered by 10 different news outlets, just attributing to the original story. Like the lack of originality in that kind of reporting is just really pissing them off. So that's kind of people are onto them. I think for a long time we treated readers like they were really stupid, but they see what those outlets are doing. They see the cheap ploys and the cheap tricks, and they know exactly what it is. And that's why clickbait has become this kind of very negative word, because people feel tricked, they feel duped in some way, and we see a real desire to work around that. There's also kind of the global shift in politics, the changing geopolitical landscape, I think, is playing very well into the need and the desire for really in-depth reporting. And people certainly are realizing that they really need to be reading about changing economic situation, changing political situation, changing relationships between religion. There are lots of areas where they really want to be informed, and I think that is a good thing for journalism.
No Blendle tem espaço para vídeo, podcast, live, jornalismo? Vocês já estão pensando em outras áreas?
We would love to. We would really love to. As I mentioned, the video thing is something that is kind of something we want to tackle. As I say, we're aware as everyone else that video is the main way that a lot of young people are getting news, and that a lot of people are engaging. They're much more likely to watch a 1.5-minute video than they are to read a 12-minute long read, and we're aware of that. There's also loads of great video journalism going on. It's not just dumbing down for the sake of getting people in. There's some blooming great video journalism happening. The partnerships, we've done these kind of individual partnerships, creating unique video for Blendle. We can now host some video content, but it's very it's limited at this point. And I think we'll see us doing more of that. In terms of podcasting, it's something we get asked quite a lot in terms of the curation that we do, because obviously our editors are reading a lot, they listen to a lot, that their job is to be immersed in their individual media landscape. So in terms of curation, I think we could offer curation around those areas. I also think our editors are phenomenally well-informed and well-read, and there could be some opportunities for our own podcasts and our own original content there. In terms of live streaming, we haven't considered that yet. But again, as video comes into this, it might be something that we could look at. But that level of dynamic content is not something we're set up for yet. And if we're going to become a real destination, as opposed to just kind of a nice to have, somewhere that the first place you turn to, the first app you open for journalism, rather than, oh, well, I might have a look at Blendle, then we really need to be able to cater for all of those things.
Uma das perguntas, tem algumas perguntas que vão no sentido de como é que vocês conseguem driblar, por exemplo, pessoas que copiam e colam a matéria e abrem a matéria em um outro site gratuito. O refound button, por exemplo, a pessoa só fica pedindo o refound sempre. Como é que vocês conseguem driblar esses pequenos tricks para não pagar?
There'll always be one. Or two or three. I don't know that we can do a huge amount about it. If we see it happening really regularly, I think we can probably flag that. But because the refund rate overall is so low at 7%, it's not something that's a huge concern to us. The other thing that we found quite powerful is actually just calling people out. So you saw on the little video there, we include in that list, you know, I just don't want to pay for this, or like I copied and pasted it. Like actually when people are faced with that, it's quite embarrassing for them that they did that. And I think if they do it once, then they might think about not doing that again. Maybe that's showing too much faith in humanity. I don't know. But it's because it's not something we see as a, you know, in the round as a really common course of action for our users. You know, our users are people who buy into our mission. They want to support quality journalism. If people want to go and get journalism for free at this point in time, they can do that a lot of places. It's a real effort to sign up for Blendle, pay for the story, read it, and then refund it. You can get stuff elsewhere. So we're not hugely concerned about it. It will always happen to a degree. And the subscription model is obviously something where that's a different kettle of fish, and we won't necessarily see that happening there because it's a flat rate. But yeah, you can't change everyone.
Tem uma pergunta aqui que é sobre um pouco sobre a estrutura da empresa. Você comentou que são 80 funcionários. Quantos são jornalistas? Quantos são engenheiros? Como é que funciona a redação da Blendle?
Yeah, we're 80 people. So around 50 of those are engineers or tech people. So you know, it's majority tech staff. We have a front-end team, a back-end team, mobile and desktop development. So a lot goes into that. That's partly because what places like Spotify did, and iTunes, and Facebook, and all of those really successful media and tech companies to a degree, they made things beautiful and they made things simple. And reading news online is not really beautiful and simple in a lot of places. And those places that are trying to do it are kind of, they really stand out. So that's why we have so many people employed in making the experience of reading news as good as it can be. So when you're paying that money, not only are you paying for the story, not only are you paying for the curation and the fact it's ad-free, you're also paying for a really nice experience. So that's what they're working on. As I say, we have 20 journalists, 18 journalists in our editorial team. So they're split between the three countries, US, Germany and the Netherlands. We have senior editors for each of those teams who lead them from an editorial point of view, so taking conference, setting the news agenda for the day, ensuring editorial standards, training, and kind of making sure that the curation is as good as can be, and of course dealing with queries from our users and readers. And in terms of kind of the wider corporate structure, you know, we're a startup, so we like to say we have a very flat structure. We can the two guys that I spoke about, Alexander and Martin. Martin has actually taken a step back from the business whilst he becomes a dad. But Alexander is around a lot, and you know, all of those 50 engineers, all of those 20 journalists, we are involved in a lot of discussions in what direction this company goes in. You know, everybody's ideas are very much encouraged, and kind of we as I say, I think I said at the beginning, we really see ourselves as a research and development lab for how to help the journalism industry, and that involves lots of rethinking our original assumptions all the time.
Já que você falou do universo de startups, como foi sair de redações tradicionais, né? Você trabalhou muito tempo no Daily Mirror, para uma startup?
Oh my God. It was so different. It was great. But yeah, I mean, the Daily Mirror is a newspaper that has been going for, I think, 150 years or more. It's a real old newspaper for the UK. And when I joined them, in 2013, I was the first hire for online only. And for the first 6 months that I was there, I regularly used to get asked if I could fix people's computers because they thought I worked in IT. And I would do it because I could do it, but that wasn't my job. So that was, you know, that was the kind of environment. So not only was it a very old newspaper, the digital operation was really in its infancy, and I was there for 3 years or so, and it developed at a huge pace, and it was much better than that by the time I left. But there was still, it took a long time to do anything in terms of the tech. You know, the layers of hierarchy you had to go through, and it was just very unwieldy. You know, it was like turning a giant ship to get anything done. And so moving to a startup, number one, it was so clean. There was no old newspapers left lying around. It was beautiful. But it was just the pace. The pace was really fantastic. It was, you know, agile is the kind of word that everybody uses to describe startups, but that is true. It's a very young newsroom, so sometimes a very young company, so sometimes that can feel scary. Sometimes you look around and think, where are the adults in the room? And that can be quite difficult at times when you're making quite big decisions and you're working with the big players. You know, we work with the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Financial Times and De Volkskrant in the Netherlands. Like, these are big guys, and so we have to work hard to really prove ourselves, and that's a real challenge. But overall, as I say, I left because I felt really bad about what I did. I no longer felt, I'd always wanted to be a journalist, and I didn't want to do it anymore because of no one was kind of, it was scale for scale's sake, it was numbers for the sake of numbers, and we weren't doing anything original, and that wasn't why I went into this. And now I feel like we're trying to build something that helps support journalism, get engaged communities, and we get free massages on a Wednesday, which is nice.
Agora, só completando um pouco, só seguindo um pouco na sua resposta, você falou que sentia que não estava fazendo nada de interessante, de criativo num veículo tradicional. Mas o Blendle ainda usa como base veículos tradicionais. Você não acha um pouco contraditório?
Yes. Yeah, I think that goes a little bit back to what I was talking about some of the changes we need to make to make this more reflective of the internet in 2017. I think Blendle is so forward-thinking in so many ways. But what's actually available in our kiosk is kind of representative of 2014, which is when we started. So moving away from, we do have web feeds for some publications. So the Wall Street Journal is a really good example. We take all of it with their web content, which is great. But we need to be doing more of that. When you think about how many stories the New York Times publishes every day, some of the amazing content at Zeit in Germany is might be web only. There are lots of things that we are missing by not having that web content. That's a renegotiation with the publishers, essentially. The deals that we have are for the print content for lots of them, and then we need to renegotiate that. So, yes, it is a contradiction in that may seem slightly old school. The delivery, I hope, is pretty forward-thinking, and kind of the understanding that we can't continue the way that we were doing. That if we do that, we really are going to bottom out, and there will be, journalists like yourselves will continue to be shed from those newsrooms. So I'm hopeful. We realise that needs to change, and I'm really hopeful about changing that whilst we're there.
Gente, só para avisar quem está ali em cima, tem um microfone. Se alguém quiser fazer alguma pergunta, só levantar a mão. Tem um microfone. Tem uma pergunta sobre curadoria. Qual a diferença entre o Blendle e o algoritmo do Facebook, que também faz curadoria de conteúdo, a partir de preferências históricas?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Facebook, I think the most important thing is that Facebook values popularity very highly. Facebook is very concerned with what is popular, what is getting the most views, and you will more likely see that than something that is not getting the views. Our algorithm is not concerned with popularity in any way, shape or form. We want to give you stuff that you're interested in, not the stuff that everybody else is interested in. At the moment, Facebook doesn't account for quality. So some of the things that we look at, markers we can look at are things like, does it include the word exclusive in it, those sorts of things. So we can look at markers of quality. There's lots of people doing really interesting work around this at the moment, actually. Not just at Blendle. I know that Frédéric Villot, the French researchers, doing some really interesting stuff around kind of how can we teach algorithms to learn about quality. So we're thinking about that too. But also what we mentioned, which was the kind of the diversification element of what we do. So making sure that you're not being fed a diet of exactly the same sorts of stories. If you've watched one quack video, you'll get 10 more. We're very much trying to move away from that. And also, I think the must-reads that we mentioned, the kind of these stories that get sent to everyone to break that filter bubble, to burst that and move away from it. That is not something that Facebook currently does. It doesn't make a decision based that lots of people have to see this. It bases it on popularity, and that's something that we just don't do.
Na era de fake news, já teve algum caso em que vocês publicaram alguma matéria que ou era fake ou que vocês se arrependeram e tiveram que tirar do ar, por exemplo?
At Blendle? I don't believe that we have. I will check that and come, but I don't believe that, unless it was something for April Fool's Day, which all the newspapers run fake stories. No, I don't believe that we have. We do have a mechanism with the publishers. Like all publishers, mistakes get made, clarifications are needed, corrections are needed, and publishers can always get in touch with us if that is needed, and we can do that on the platform and make sure that's clear to our readers. But no, again, I think that really comes from working with quality publishers. We don't really get those sorts of stories that are dubious in their origin or their sourcing or anything else. But I will double check on it.
Tem uma pergunta que quer saber um pouco como é que é feita a seleção dos veículos que vão entrar na plataforma do Blendle. Então, por exemplo, alguns veículos são de fora. Como é que vocês fazem a tradução desse material? Como é que vocês fazem a escolha e como é que é a tradução do produto?
Yeah. So, how do we select publishers? We start off, with like all businesses, we start off thinking about a target audience and what would these people like to read. And we definitely want to work with the biggest players in every market. We are interested in those real quality publications that we know produce fantastic journalism. We do also get publications that come to us. We're always pleased to say that we have more publications coming to us asking to be on the platform than we can handle putting on the platform. But I think over time we'll maybe need to narrow that focus a little bit. We're quite broad brush at the moment, from big newspaper publications down to kind of like Psychology Today is quite a niche publication. We cover quite a broad range at the moment, and that's something we need to consider whether we keep doing that or do we want to cater to much more smaller interest area. In terms of translation, so we don't translate. We have different platforms for different countries. So the US platform has US and UK English language publications on it. The German platform has German language publications from Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, plus English language publications on there, because a lot of Europeans speak fluent or read fluent English as well, so that caters for them. And in the Netherlands, we have another platform that has Dutch content, Belgian publications, and again, the English language content is on there, so we don't translate content from the original language that it's written in. Other than once, I know we've done it in the last month, because the European Press Prize, we did a partnership with them where we translated all of the winning pieces into English.
Tem uma pergunta que quer saber a sua opinião sobre fact-checking e se é uma prioridade para o Blendle, se tem uma boa leitura a matéria de fact-checking.
Yeah, we have readers who tell us that stories that we've recommended should have not been appropriately fact-checked, and we also have readers who tell us so when our editors read a story and they write a recommendation based on that, so that recommendation might go into an email newsletter or onto the platform, we have a lot of readers who will come and tell us when that recommendation has been written in a way that does not reflect the piece. We've got a really engaged readership, and obviously, again, if they're clicking on a story, and paying for it, they want to be really sure that the recommendation they've done that, they've based that on, is factually correct. And if they get there and the story is different from the recommendation, understandably, they let us know. As far as fact-checking of the stories that we recommend, I mean, again, we are the platform, not the publisher, so we very much feel that the publications we work with will do that, those kind of big operations. And in terms of the recommendations that we write, that's a big part of my job, is making sure that all of the journalists I work with are really representing the story as it was written, and not sensationalizing elements of it in any way, not teasing out something that sounds great but is in fact a very small part of the story. So yeah, and as I say, our readers definitely let us know when we've got that wrong.
Você acabou de falar de newsletter. Vocês têm uma newsletter, é isso? Como é que funciona essa newsletter e que tipo de matéria? Você falou, a gente não usa o what, a gente vai mais pelo why, mas vocês dão uma geral, essa newsletter também faz uma geral dos principais acontecimentos, como funciona a sua newsletter, o que você acha da de newsletter?
Yeah, newsletter is actually the main element of delivery for our stories. That's where the majority of our traffic comes from, is from email newsletter. That's starting to change with the premium model a little bit, but certainly for micropayments, most of our traffic comes via email newsletter. So it's a really key part of what we do. We have a morning newsletter, a daily digest, and we have a number of other weekly products. So it might be, I think I mentioned the deep dive, it might be an exploration of one particular issue, and we have other weekly newsletters that look at perhaps the best long reads of the week, or on other themes and verticals. The Daily Digest, which is our kind of main flagship editorial product, so the personalized selection of stories goes out in that. It does start with a kind of 3 stories you need to know about today, so a kind of live news analysis, or kind of update, so people get a sense of the morning's headlines there. And then we have 12 stories. 3 of them are the must-reads, the ones that everybody gets, and then the other 9 are a personalized selection for you. But yeah, I mean, email newsletter, email's had a real resurgence in the last few years, both for news organizations and individual journalists. And we really see that as a really important method for people finding our stories and coming to the site. As I say, we'd like to see that shift, because obviously we want people to be coming to our app, we want people to be coming to the website. And to do that, we need to think a little bit more about how we make our site a destination. So currently, you know, there is no aspect of live news in there. Now, we don't really think of ourselves as live news providers. As a Storyful often say that the first 5 minutes aren't ours, and we're not there to report live news. But I think if you're, again, becoming a destination, I want to be able to log into an app and see, okay, Trump said this, Merkel said that, and this has happened in Pakistan. And then I want to see the analysis that's connected to it. So we need to think about giving a more complete experience, I think. And the same goes for our newsletters as well.
Os seus jornalistas, eles escrevem análises ou eles só fazem a recomendação? Uma análise daquela matéria, ou eles fazem análises políticas sobre os fatos também?
No, they don't. That goes back to our curation guidelines, which is very much around not being there to take one particular slant on news or one particular political viewpoint. They do write the recommendations. They write slightly longer form with products like the deep dive, where they might be talking about what have we done one on recently? We did one on Otto Warmbier, the American who died after coming back from North Korea. So we did a long newsletter which kind of went through all of the events and kind of gave lots of different analysis. So we linked and pointed to analysis from different sides of the political spectrum. But in terms of making their own political commentary, we don't do that. We do sometimes do blog posts on things like the patterns that we see in people's reading. So in that sense, you know, kind of as a think tank for journalism, we do make comment on that. But we're not there to pass comment on the actual stories. As long as they are original, well-sourced, quality reporting, we'll recommend them.
Temos mais 2 minutos só. A gente só tem mais 2 minutos. Eu queria te fazer uma pergunta. Você acabou de falar que a ideia, né, com esse teste do modelo de subscription é que o Blendle vire uma plataforma destino. Quando vocês apresentaram para os publishers, isso não virou um problema? Porque, né, os dados que você apresentou mostram que quando você estava fazendo apenas um modelo de micropayment, você estava conseguindo levar a gente para os portais, para os sites dos publishers. Você tendo agora um modelo de subscription, você não vai tirar dos publishers? Vocês não teve um pequeno confronto ali na hora que vocês apresentaram esse novo modelo? Ninguém ameaçou abandonar a plataforma, por exemplo?
Yes. Yeah, we had I was hoping this wouldn't be brought up, but we had no, we did. We had a Dutch publisher pull out about 2 months ago over these sorts of concerns, and we understand them. We'll go back to that thing that I talked about a little bit about cannibalization, which is that from our research and our experience, it doesn't bear out. These aren't people who would be buying those subscriptions anyway. But the other thing we say is, you know, if we refer back to Spotify, this is a slightly weird link, but Taylor Swift leaves Spotify and then she comes back, and that's okay. And we, you know, we respect the publisher's right to do those things and go and experiment with their own things. We really hope that they'll come back. Of course we do. And we don't burn bridges, and we keep that relationship very much open. But that's the thing about being an R&D lab here, is that the experimentation takes time, and that relationship is one that takes a lot of work. So we hope that for those ones that might leave, the subscription stuff that we're seeing at the moment, we will build a really strong case, and we're seeing that we're building a strong case that those fears are largely unfounded. But we do understand it, and we just have to keep talking to those publishers. And as I say, as platforms, that will happen. You're seeing it with Facebook at the moment. You know, a lot of people leaving instant articles because they're not getting what they want. They're not getting the data that they want. They're not getting the revenue that they want. And we'd be stupid not to listen to the criticisms and the concerns. So that's what we try and do, is listen, adapt the product, and go back again.
Ótimo. Só para encerrar, alguém tem mais alguma pergunta? Gostaria de fazer?
Ótimo, Jéssica, eu queria te agradecer. Muitíssimo obrigada. Obrigada principalmente pelo otimismo, né? Que eu acho que estamos precisando de mensagem de otimismo.
Thank you.
Prazer. Você aproveita o Brasil.
Alô. Pessoal, boa tarde.